Hey, what's up guys? How are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and I hope you're not sick of talking about the Nintendo Switch 2, which I know you're not, because everyone's talking about it and we're all enjoying all the theories and all the speculations and whatnot. Because we are going to talk a little bit more about the idea of the Switch 2, but really this is all born out of a recent interview that Furukawa gave with Nikkei, where he discussed Nintendo's plans to support the current Nintendo Switch into 2025, which is both interesting and really not very surprising to me, but that of course has started a whole different conversation around how that fits into their transition to the Nintendo Switch 2. I have many thoughts about it because I think it's painting a pretty clear picture, so I want to jump into that with you today. So like I said, this came from an interview with Furukawa when he was speaking with Nikkei, and VGC has translated some of his statements around this topic, and they are certainly very enlightening and eye-opening. And here is what he said, again translated by VGC, regarding the support of the Switch for a few more years. He says, "We are still working on software for the Switch for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2025. In the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024, we hope to sustain the momentum of Zelda and the Super Mario Bros. Movie with focus on the holiday sales season. As for hardware, we will maximize not only new demand for the hardware, but also for those buying second consoles and replacements." So pretty interesting, and like I said, pretty telling when it comes to their plans for the current Switch. He basically says, he exactly says, up until the fiscal year, which ends in March of 2025, so, just under 2 years from now, they are currently working on software that will release within that time frame. So that's the key thing. He says we're working on software for the Switch for the year ending March 31st, 2025. Of course, March 31st is when their fiscal year ends. Most of us know that. And so that's a very interesting phrase that I think it's worth noting, because it's confirmation that whatever games that they're working on currently that maybe we don't yet know about, there are titles that will release on the current Switch. He's not ruling out cross-generational release titles, of course, but titles that in some way, shape, or form will release on the current Switch before March of 2025. So he's giving like an 18-month window for games that we don't yet know about. We have to remember that we already know about a few Switch games that are releasing next year in 2024. Most notably, Princess Peach Showtime, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door remake. There's also Mario vs. Donkey Kong. So we know that, in the first half of the year, we're probably going to see those handful of games. But outside of that, and then of course there's the ever-present mystery around Metroid Prime 4, right? But we don't know anything specific about that game yet, despite what I think is going to happen there. As far as the other games I listed, we know those are games set to release in 2024, I think for the most part in the first half of the year. And so when he says that we're also working on stuff to support the Switch through 2025, he has to be talking about games that aren't those games. So Metroid Prime 4 certainly could be one of the titles that he's referring to, and I think that it probably is. But there also could be something else that we don't know about and are not thinking of that he's also referring to. So it's very interesting to know he's saying the Switch will be supported through 2025. The other statement he makes is also very curious because he talks about the fiscal year ending March 2024, which is again 5 or 6 months from now. And he says, we hope to sustain momentum of Zelda and the Super Mario Bros. Movie with focus on the holiday sales season. He talks about wanting to sell current Switches to new buyers as well as secondary Switches to people looking for other Switches, because that's a huge reason the Switch has been so successful, is it very much lends itself to one household having multiple Switches, right? I think that's part of where the success has come from. And so it's a weird way to confirm that, really in 2023, they're still focused on selling the current Switch through the end of the year. So I think that's a way to confirm that we probably won't see the Switch 2 revealed this year. So, that's a long time prediction I had that probably won't come true, and that's okay. But then he talks about sustaining momentum through March next year, 6 months from now, based on the Super Mario Bros. Movie and Zelda. I think when he talks about the Mario Brothers movie, it's simply because there are so many Mario games coming out between now and March next year. I mean, literally, it's Mario Brothers Wonder, Mario RPG Remake. I'm pretty sure Mario vs. Donkey Kong and Princess Peach are both releasing in the first quarter of 2024. And so that's 4 Mario games between now and March next year that he references. that are releasing. And so I think that's the Mario Brothers movie part of the sales conversation he's talking about. When he mentions Zelda, the momentum of Zelda, I mean, since we know they're not releasing DLC for Tears of the Kingdom, I think he's just talking about relying on sales of that game. You know, I think Nintendo is planning on another bump in sales for Tears of the Kingdom through the holiday and maybe into next year. I don't think they're going to release any new games. Maybe he's talking about a surprise release in early 2024 of Wind Waker or Twilight Princess HD. Maybe he's thinking about that without revealing it. But more than likely, I think they're just banking on Tears of the Kingdom continuing to sell pretty well, especially through the holiday. And so at the end of the day, we come down to the biggest and most important statement here, supporting the current Switch through March of 2025. And what does this ultimately mean? To me, what this means is we're just going to see that expected overlap of the current Switch and the Switch 2 on the market for a period of time. This is something I've talked about for a while, for a couple of years, even going back to when I first started theorizing about a Switch 2 or a next generation system. Nothing is confirmed, but again, 99% of us do expect to see the thing next year in some fashion, which is very exciting if that does happen. But what we have to remember, and I bring this up often, for those people who are very emotionally attached to the current Switch, there's no reason to think that as soon as the Switch 2 is available on store shelves that the current Switch is obliterated from existence. There's no reason to think that. It's not going to happen. There will be several years of overlap of the Switch and the Switch 2 on the market, and Nintendo and other companies will be supporting the current Switch even after the Switch 2 has launched. There are games still releasing on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, and there were games releasing on the Nintendo Wii well into the Wii U's life and even into the Switch's life. So when a console is successful like the current Switch is, it gets supported into the next generation because there is a transitional period where they expect people will wait to purchase the new system or have trouble finding one, and when an install base is as large as the Switch's is, they know they can't ignore it, which is what leads to like conversations around Metroid Prime 4 and why I and many other people think it'll be cross-generational. There will be a definitive Switch 2 around launch, I do believe that. A Switch 2 version, I should say, around launch, but they will also probably release a Switch version because the install base is massive and it'll make that game available to more people. So a large part of this conversation is just to drive home the point that a lot of folks could be misinterpreting this and saying, oh, this is confirmation that the Switch 2 won't release before March of 2025. And while anything is possible, I don't think that's what this is saying at all. This isn't even really about the Switch 2. I think most of us are just interpreting this to be related to the transition to the Switch 2. But it's just another excuse to remind folks who sometimes forget these things, or folks who are young enough to have not experienced console transitions before, that it is normal for there to be that period of overlap, okay? And if I'm even being honest, he says they're working on titles through March 2025. I wouldn't be surprised if they plan on supporting the Switch until 2026. So he says 2025, but I'm not even taking that as fact. I bet the Switch will still be getting support in games into 2026. That's just a guess, but it feels like the right call for them to do based on how successful it is. But it doesn't change my theory and a lot of other people's thinking about 2024, next year being the time to finally reveal and probably release the Switch 2. I just don't see a world where December 31st, 2024 happens and none of us have a Switch 2. It's just not going to happen. That thing will release next year. You know, the last Nintendo Direct showed us that they're phasing things out. Most of the games we know that they're making, with the exception of Mario Wonder and Princess Peach and whatever's happening with Metroid Prime 4, they're doing a lot of remakes and remasters and re-releases of older games. You know, Metroid Prime Remastered came out this year. We just had Batten Kaitos, Pikmin 1 and 2. You know, that's just kind of their big focus right now, other than a couple of key titles. And even their biggest titles that we know about next year, they're not that big. Paper Mario is a remake. Mario vs. Donkey Kong isn't going to be a huge game. I mean, it might be fun, but it's not going to be a huge game. Even Princess Peach, as neat as it looks, it's not going to be a massive game. I'm sure it's going to be good, and I'm sure it's going to sell well for what it is, but it's not on the same tier as a new Mario game. It just isn't. No offense to Peach, because I love Peach, and the game looks fun, right? So I think that Nintendo finds himself in a position where their Nintendo Direct announcements, their current lineup we know about, the mystery around Metroid Prime 4, tells us that they're phasing out the current Switch as their sole hardware on the market, and that they're prepping us to reveal and probably release the Switch 2 sometime next year. At the end of the day, I find this all very exciting. I think this is a good thing. It's a positive thing. I try very hard to remind folks of that way that I think about this stuff in these videos pretty often, because it could be easy for some folks to just get a little bit in their own feelings about this and feel upset or defensive about the current Switch. And that's just not necessary. None of this is a bad thing. No piece of video game hardware lasts forever. Video games live within the world of technology, and technology by default always advances itself and improves itself. And take it from someone like myself who's been around for many decades, experiencing many console transitions and hardware advancements, it is normal for things to change and for generations to overlap and for one hardware to be phased out, whereas the new replacement hardware phases in and takes over and becomes the default machine for a period of time. It's a good thing, it's a normal thing, and like I said, for me, it's a very exciting thing. And so I'm glad the Switch, I should say, has been so successful and will get supported at least till 2025, if not longer. But that doesn't mean that the Switch 2 isn't coming sooner than later, and it doesn't mean that there won't be overlap of a few years. So that's what I think. Tell me what you guys think, and that's about it.